Good evening, everyone. It's July 1, 2013. I'm Rene Ritchie, and tonight we're going to get into all the bits and atoms of not only the newly announced Macs, but what might be coming to both the Macs and iOS devices this fall. That's because we have Brian Klug from Anandtech here tonight, and it's going to get nerdy. This is the iMore Show. Joining me tonight is the mobile editor from Anandtech, Brian Klug. How are you, Brian?
I'm awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Pause for a second. I'm going to open Wikipedia because every time I talk with you, I've got to look up something like ArcLight Minute, just to make sure I can keep up. So I have that loaded now. How have you been doing?
Oh, pretty good. Yeah, same old. It's been a busy couple
They
weeks.
don't stop, especially because I only cover iPhone, so I get busy once a year, maybe, sometimes. Every 16 months, maybe.
Right.
But people like you, Phil Nickinson, I don't know how you do it. It's like someone sitting there pelting you with phones.
That's how it works. Yeah. I don't know. It's it breaks things up a little bit. I don't choose to necessarily cover everything either. So it's only it's only the things that I think are like flagship or really worth talking about or whatever. But yeah, it's been busy.
Can we start with the WWDC stuff? Because I think that's fairly recent.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So I'm interested in your point of view.
There's a bunch of stuff there.
So I'm interested in your point of view. And the first thing that struck me was this focus on battery life for the MacBook Air, because for so long, computers were speeds and feeds. And we had a little bit of that with like SSD performance and RAM performance. But the killer feature seemed to be a switch in focus from raw horsepower to battery life. And I thought that was a pretty good change in focus, actually.
Well, I mean, most of them are just most of the stuff that the battery life improvements come from Haswell, and what's fascinating there is that a lot of the platform changes that they kind of talked about from Mavericks also just kind of come from Haswell. Things like the coalescing of timers. Yeah. So a lot of those gains you kind of I don't want to say they get for free from just like Intel, but they sort of do, and the rest of it. I don't know where that really comes from, but it's, again, primarily just determined by the platform. It's great to see like the Air sort of branching off as this non-pro alternative. Before it was kind of like just thinner. Now it's kind of like if you don't need, the performance of the Pro, or this necessarily, more power hungry platform, you can go to the Air and, at the same time you get more battery life. So I guess that's the really interesting thing is to see that, it's sort of branching off to become this thing of its own.
Yeah, I heard,
beyond just thin.
I heard before the show that if you were expecting a Retina MacBook Air, you'll be getting a Retina 13-inch MacBook Pro, and that sort of is the Retina MacBook Air because they're getting the Pros so thin and so light. And I think that's sort of fair because if you put a Retina screen in there, it will start messing with the black magic that makes that battery life.
Right. You know what? And what strikes me is that I was using the 2011 MacBook Pro for the longest time, and then finally I got the Retina MacBook Pro 15-inch, and I was like, the difference in thinness is appreciable, and I really don't know if I want thinner. I mean, I guess I said that before, but it's already so thin. Yeah, it's effectively when you go out, people are almost like, "Is that the Air?" So
yeah.
I think I'd agree with you there. But, I mean, and what was also surprising was that we didn't see it, we didn't see the refresh of the Retinas. We didn't see that, the Air with Retina there, like you were mentioning, that people kind of want to happen. Whether that's a reality or not, I mean, that's anybody's guess. I really don't know on the Mac side. But obviously the inclusion of AC is a big deal, too. I'm still wanting that in the Retina MacBook
I think
Pro.
we're going to see that everywhere. I think the AC, it debuted in the Air, but it'll be in the Retina MacBook Pros, and I'd be surprised if it's not in the iOS device refresh this fall, too.
Right, yeah, the new combo. What was it? It's like 4339, I think. No, it's not 4339. There's another combo that they just announced, that Broadcom just announced, that has AC in it. And it's got the power amp built in, so it's a little bit more accessible for OEMs. So yeah, I mean, obviously that's going to end up everywhere, but what's interesting about the Air is that it's still two stream, which there's nothing wrong with, but I was hoping they would move to three, but
Well,
yeah, AC is a big deal. I haven't had a chance to play with the new Airs, but I mean, obviously the battery life improvements are so huge that it's almost
yeah,
worth it. For me personally, though, I just always can't move away from the Pro because I want all that power, especially for things like Lightroom,
yeah.
messing around. I don't know. Maybe I'm just
Well, I
imagining
went
things.
exactly like you. I went from the 2011 MacBook Air to the Retina MacBook Pro 15-inch, mostly for Photoshop and Final Cut Pro, and because it
Right.
has a discrete graphics core. These have all the Intel 5000 now, right? The Intel HD 5000 is part of Haswell, and it's theoretically better. And maybe when I use a Retina MacBook Pro, when they get Haswell, I won't lose my mind watching the screen fracture when it tries to, move windows around too quickly.
Right. Yeah, the Intel graphics got a lot better this time with GTE 3. I mean GT 3E. So with the ED RAM and all that stuff, Iris Pro, Iris. I mean, I'll spare all the gory details, but I mean a lot of that is driven by Intel, and a lot of that is driven by
Yeah.
Apple. So obviously the two want to sort of have a platform solution that works together, and I think it's fair to say that it's good enough now for like the majority of desktop use
Yeah.
cases. Um, it's arguable whether it's going to, I think on paper it's faster than the current GPU and the 2011 MacBook, the Retina MacBook Pro. What am I
Yeah.
saying? But obviously it's always a function of how much can you squeeze out in the drivers, how well optimized is everything. So that's the interesting like addendum to the whole story. I'm not as much of an expert at that, but it's great to see sort of the Intel graphics getting better, but everybody's gonna bemoan the loss of the discrete GPU or like whatever happens in the Retina one.
But I think they're like clearly
But
bifurcating the line. Like they're saying that if you don't care, if your primary, the most important feature to you in a laptop is long battery life, and you don't care about display and you don't care about raw horsepower, here's the MacBook Air. It's even cheaper now for the 13-inch than it ever was before. Go on your
right,
business class flight, go work at Starbucks and enjoy. And if you're the kind of guy who's running Logic Pro or Final Cut Pro or Aperture or Lightroom or Photoshop, and you want as much
right.
horsepower as possible, we're going to have whatever quad core Haswell Retina MacBook Pro and a 13-inch for the middle ground coming your way, and it's very clearly defined products again.
Right. I mean, that's totally what's going on. And that's the only way to really, deliver that sort of battery life because there's always going to be the fact that the other side, the more pro side is going to be more power hungry.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know. I don't know if it's going to get any thinner. I mean, who knows? Uh, I'm just amazed already. Um it's funny. I can't use these laptops on the plane like whenever I go on the plane, the dude in front of me reclines. Have you
Yeah.
I don't know if I just have bad luck, but it's like every time I bring my notebook out, like that's just like they hear it. I don't know if there's like a sound, and then boom, the seat comes back.
What I do is I don't put down the tray. I put it on my lap and I make it in a wedge formation so that it's sort of not flat, but it's sort of arcing up, and then I type it almost 45 degrees straight
Oh,
down.
so you do the
Yeah.
T-Rex. You do the
Is
like
that what
the
it's called? The T-Rex? Nice.
yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
The other thing that I thought was interesting was that Apple, overtly said that they're pushing people towards OpenCL. They want things to be
Sure.
piped into the GPUs, and the Mac Pro, I think, was the most obscene example of that because it does have up to a quad-core processor, but it's got those two honking GPUs welded inside the machine, and it's going to be way faster if you do, those best practices than if you like sort of treat it like a traditional Mac Pro.
Right. I mean, they've always kind of been trying to find a use case for OpenCL. I've never been quite clear about what exactly, what parts of the OS are and aren't accelerated by it, or what parts of the entire experience are, sort of driven by the GPU on OS 10. But it's a little bit interesting to see that this move to the non-standard form
Yeah.
factor. I don't know if it's something necessarily bad. Like everybody kind of bemoaned the loss of like these cards that fit the normal
Yeah.
PCIe form factor. What's interesting is that that whole platform is still modular. Like you can still swap out the
Hmm.
SSD, you can still swap out the RAM, you can still swap out the GPU. It's just proprietary interfaces, so makes things a little bit more obfuscated,
Yeah,
I guess. But yeah, I mean that thing's a monster, and everybody was like, I don't know if the thermal's going to work, but I mean, I think the chimney concept looks awesome on
absolutely.
paper. Connecting everything together might be a bad idea, thermally, because that's just a bad idea. If something gets really hot, it's going to warm up the other things. But like obviously taking advantage of convection seems like a great concept. Um, and it's
Yeah,
small. It's like really
1/8 the
small.
volume of the
Yeah,
previous one.
yeah, and the pictures didn't really do it justice. Like, when they put up that slide, it's kind of like, well, okay, how big
Yeah,
is it? But then like you stepped outside and then you saw this thing, and it's like, okay, wow,
yeah.
that's tiny.
Our videographer was
So,
trying to figure out if he could put it in his backpack and take it with him for hotel renders while he does his, while he does his work.
I mean, yeah, it's effectively like the new G4
Yeah,
Cube, right? But done right.
we hope. Fingers
So, I
crossed.
mean, not, yeah, we don't want to evoke, like terrible memories and all sorts of like gnashing of teeth there, but that's essentially what it is.
So what I'm interested
So,
in is does this kind of stuff, I mean, with the original MacBook Air and then the MacBook Pros and then the iMac and now the Mac Pro, Apple has gone more and more into these hermetically sealed computing environments, and that sort of is what they've always done with iOS. And the only thing I've heard so far about the Apple A7 is that it's more advanced, but that doesn't necessarily mean more powerful. So I'm wondering if that philosophy from the MacBook Air is going to translate to their mobile devices. And the big thing with A7 is going to be battery life, either to extend it or to make things like a Retina iPad mini or a thin Retina iPad 5 last 10 hours like previous generations.
right. Well, I mean, Apple has always kind of like held out. Like they haven't really gone to quad core, at least for phones. There's that element of, we don't necessarily need to do things that we don't want to
Hmm.
optimize to. So, I mean, part of that is again, like they have their own Swift. I'm sure there's going to be like an update coming to that, that will bring something, like higher IPC. Who knows? So obviously they have more power over their own destiny, and the other thing is that like probably a process node change, either to 28 Samsung or 28 at TSMC, or maybe even 28 with like the high K options. So like those are
Hmm.
interesting things. I don't know if it's going to get like dramatically better. The gains sort of get smaller as you go on now, um, and actually the leakage might go
Yeah.
up. It's just the fact of reality is that like you're getting less evolutionary gains from moving around. So currently they're at 32 at Samsung, with the high K. So whether they like see a big gain from going to 28 at Samsung, or like the rumors are true and they go to TSMC, um, like it's probably not going to be a dramatic thing. Obviously for Apple, yeah, I think thinness and battery life are like the two kind of like opposing
Yeah.
optimizations. um Obviously they're going to be unwilling to ever go to like this, the easy solution, which is just a huge battery, like a
Which
bigger
is what we
tank,
asked for
which
last
is
time.
something,
Just give us a
like,
couple more millimeters of battery.
yeah, it's something like maybe they should do, maybe you need to do at the end of the day. um I think they've had that debate settled internally for a
Mhm.
while, and the answer is no. But I mean, you saw those pictures that sort of leaked, and like the battery does get bigger aerially, like
Mhm.
2D, uh, slightly, just because like they're shrinking and moving things
Yeah.
around on the board. Like integration area is always kind of going down. Um, but as I don't know if you're expecting huge gains, I think you're going to be disappointed, sadly, just because like the gains in Haswell were more from them sort of having a mobile focus now.
Yeah.
Uh, obviously the phone has already been mobile focused for a long time, so I mean, what are you really going to change? And the answer is that there's really not a lot. And some of this is again just gated by like the processes that are available for your silicon. And again, there really aren't that many options. Like those two are pretty much the only
Mhm.
viable ones. and both of them aren't going to bring like this huge, amazing 50% number that everybody sort of wants. It's sort of like maybe like you're going to get smaller, so you're going to get more dense, um, but it's not going to be a huge power gain anymore. And I think again, Apple sort of resisting the quad core thing, at least for their phone part, has been sort of a like a saving
Mm-hmm.
grace. Um,
Well,
because they kind of prioritize single threaded performance. Like it seems like everything is still primarily one or two threads. I've never really seen, of course, maybe if you suddenly had a quad core Apple SoC, like the apps would eat it all up. But it doesn't really seem like that's their, like that's their big
well, they
goal.
haven't really needed it in terms of just raw OS performance. They haven't needed it yet.
Right. I mean, there's always that argument about like there's less overhead because it's all
Mm-hmm.
native, whereas obviously on Android there's that Java layer. So, you're always going to be somewhat limited. Like increasingly that's going away on the Android side as they sort of move everything to this, more sane model that has the right optimizations in
Yeah.
place. So, I don't know how much of that is like reality versus imagined. It's hard to really know. Um, Obviously, Apple has tighter integrations, so they know exactly what to
Yeah.
optimize. There's more. There seems like in iOS 7, there's going to be more emphasis on like GPU
Yeah.
elements, like the transparencies, and all that sort of stuff, the blur. But it doesn't seem like it's going to be overwhelmingly more demanding. Like there was some talk about how like they're pushing the envelope in all sorts of ways. Like a transparency really isn't that hard. So and I think somebody else profiled like the number of instructions to send an iMessage went down. So like things are getting
Yeah.
better rather than
Although we
worse.
had Lauren
And
Richter on Iterate, and he said as a graphics engineer, the blur shaders in iOS 7 made him want to cry.
really, so they're probably not even
Well,
optimized
they
yet.
might be, but just the idea of it looks like in iOS 7 they're always on and they only selectively turned off rather than the other way around, which is
Oh,
incredibly
great.
computationally expensive.
Well, I hope they fix some of that then. I mean, I haven't looked. I don't know anything about like how they're implemented, but that's rather alarming. I mean, let's hope that it gets better. But in the best optimized sense, like there shouldn't be anything hugely expensive, if they get it under control.
Yeah. Well, there's a
But
couple things. So
I don't know. I could be wrong.
there's a couple things I want to break down there. So just to go back for a second, I've heard for a long time that there's like this Skunkworks project to basically get a MacBook Air onto ARM, and that using everything they're using now, you would just go to an all-day battery life, basically. I don't know if it would hit 15 hours, 18 hours, 24 hours at some point, but does that sound like a
Sure.
reasonable? I've heard this is like a year out, 2 years out, so whatever's after Mavericks or after that. But is that as they're getting to these 9-inch little tiny computers, they're almost becoming like that is the iPad Pro that people have been talking about. It's just going to be the 9-inch Air
Right.
running ARM or something.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously Intel doesn't want that to
Yeah.
happen. So they don't want to lose that customer. So, I mean, I don't know if that's maybe, I think that's sort of like a
Yeah.
threat. I don't know if that's really ever going to happen, obviously, because the application ecosystem would have to change. Maybe you can have some accommodations to make it easier, but it's just going to be the fact that you're always running into this architecture difference. I mean, the rest of it, I mean, yeah, maybe you get way better battery life. You'd have to have a beefier Swift to do
Mm-hmm.
it. You'd have to have something like A15s. Um, I don't know if I think maybe that was a viable, like credible threat, years ago, or like in the past recently. But I don't know if it is anymore, to be honest. I think it's more of a credible threat that like Intel is starting to get very
Mm-hmm.
serious here, and then you're seeing the result of like sort of their initial panic, upon realizing that they had this like compelling desktop story, but then nothing really that was very credible
Their tablets
mobile.
needed fans.
Um, yeah, so that whole problem is sort of like they had their own call to arms and restructuring, and like the fruits of that effort are starting to come to bear. Um, I think it would be interesting to see it, and maybe see like what that
Mm-hmm.
platform looked like from a performance and power situation. But I don't know if it's going to be necessarily like the rosy picture that everybody imagines. Just
Absolutely.
because again, like you're going to take a hit in performance, you're going to take a hit, in this, like application support. Um, Obviously it's Apple, so they have, like they probably are in a better position to do it than maybe
Hmm.
Microsoft was with Windows RT, and we know how well that ended. So I always hate to say like it's never, but I feel like that's one of those rumors that like never kind of goes away
Yeah.
type deal. And I'm sure they have it in development somewhere. Like it's sitting there running, like some like
Yeah.
A7, A8, who knows? And yeah, that would have to be quad core, I would say, and a big GPU. I think there's a lot of stuff involved with making like an actual notebook, beyond just the tablet, like all the I/O that you
It's
need,
interesting how they're
the
blurring the lines
power
between
points.
traditional computers and mobile sort of already with the Air.
Oh yeah, oh totally. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the Air personally. Like, I think I still think it's not really quite powerful
Yeah.
enough for me. Uh, but it's obviously a very compelling product for a lot of people, which is fascinating because initially it was sort of like this, this also ran, you know, like it was lower power. Sure, it was thinner, but you made all these accommodations as
Hmm.
a result, and now it's sort of like the de facto platform, and the Retina one isn't also ran. So it is interesting to see how it's sort of evolved into becoming like the de facto notebook, whereas like the Pro is now kind of become a
Yeah,
niche.
absolutely. It's this universal. It's that I don't want to say the tired cars trucks analogy, but it is like the continued mainstreaming of computers, and mainstream people typically have less arduous tasks to perform than you calculating ArcLight minutes and things.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
Or digits of pi to just like 9,000
absolutely.
places.
The other interesting thing is, and you mentioned iOS 7 previously, and I heard right before the launch that Apple was going to be trying this next thing, that it wasn't going to be just a skin of iOS 6, but they were trying what was next. And then it was
Huh.
like this objectified, gamified interface that they came out with, like the whole thing. According to Twitter, at least, the guy who wrote Quake 3 Tournament, I think, wrote the graphics engine for it. And there's a particle engine for it, and it works. They're
Yeah.
very careful not to say Earth physics because it's not to say physics because it's not Earth physics, but it's physics like, and it bounces and it collides, and it's not animated anymore. It actually behaves like real world objects, and a couple
Right.
articles this week sort of picked up on that. One by Alan Pike, one by Marco Arment, about how that kind of stuff sort of caters to exactly what Apple is good at, which is integrated hardware software so they can write exactly for their platform and doing things that are computationally expensive. And that makes it both more difficult to compete with web apps, but also maybe for licensed devices where they're using commodity hardware, they may not be able to replicate that sort of interface paradigm very soon.
Right. I mean, what's interesting is that I was unclear whether it was like Box 2D, or
It's
it seems
it's
like
like a
it's
Coco,
like a
yeah,
UI
it's like a
library,
Coco version of
and
Box
that
2D, I think.
yeah, and if you look at the animations that they sort of showed off on stage, like the bouncy thing, I think they talked about a lot of this. That it seems like they're using that library, so that seems very cool. I mean, obviously, like a lot of what Apple does, that seems really great is delivering these awesome
Hmm.
toolkits, and like sort of like taking the heavy lifting and like doing it in the best possible way, optimizing the crap out of it, and then like what the developer gets is going to be the canonical best way to do things.
And it's not
um
breaking NDA
yeah, I
because
think
on
that
Apple's public developer site, they have SpriteKit listed as the beneficiary of all this technology they put in the
right,
UI.
right, yeah. So I mean, I think they want to really have an animated like user experience. That's the thing for me, is that um they didn't really show it off as much, or maybe at least it didn't hit me on stage nearly as much until I like thought about it and sort of read more. Just like how many animations there really
Hmm.
are, and like that's sort of the big thing. It's not like it's difficult to convey in
Yeah,
screenshots
absolutely.
all of what's changed, and there's really this constant motion, and like everything's kind of animated, and like the physics engine is obviously implemented everywhere. Like things
Yeah.
bounce. You saw that like somebody was leaking like the springboard settings, where they sort of had like all these different
Yeah.
parameters you could adjust, like mass and gravity and all this other stuff. So I think that's probably the bigger thing, honestly, than like the fact that there are layers now in this like
Hmm.
parallax deal, which like everybody sort of talks about as being like the big change, and it sort of comes across in screenshots
Hmm.
really well. But this constant animation and like everything is moving. is kind of crazy when like you actually look at it. So I would agree with you there.
And
Yeah, that's a big
And Nevin
deal.
Mergen on Iterate, and I think Brad Ellis too, were talking about how Apple has a tool in-house now that's like Quartz on steroids that, it's not public, not available to developers, but they can use to build all these kinds of things. So it's not in the old OS, it would like animate something as an effect, but in the new OS, that's just how stuff works. It's no longer really an animation. It's the state of the operating system that it is all these physical objects that move with direct manipulation. And I like that because I'm not a big fan of abstract gestures, like, like make a hook motion to do this, because they're not discoverable.
Right.
They're okay as shortcuts, but if they're not pervasive, you'll never get muscle memory for them. But the idea of touching a
Right.
screen and pulling something sideways or lifting it up or turning it around seems very intuitive to me. And it does seem like that multi-touch promise taken to the next level.
Right. I mean, it seems like the natural thing to do, like you're saying, exactly, because otherwise it doesn't really flow like in a coherent way to have these sort of bubbly things that are animated. Unless everything is like that, and part of that is like making this accessible to everybody else that isn't necessarily an Apple designer. So I think that's the real big deal is that to keep everything consistent, they're gonna have to do more stuff like this.
Yeah.
Obviously, they have their style guide. Obviously they have their these new libraries. Um, I think that's the real thing though, is that like in the new version, everything's gonna feel very dated unless it gets updated quickly, and that's going to be interesting because I remember, like with iPhone 5 and the Retina iPhone, like things
Yeah.
take a while, on the order of months, especially for some of these big apps. So, that'll be the real proof in the pudding to see, like how well fleshed out, is the support, and the rest of the tools to make these things work. Um, Obviously, like I can't speak to anybody's, like particular app or implementation, but like I think there was a line in those the style guides which they just like publicly posted, um, that was like, if you have a custom UI, it's going to be an
Yeah.
arduous process. So I mean, I look at some of these apps and I think, like, wow, if they weren't using, UI kit, then this is going to be
Well,
interesting.
everyone points
So
at Tweetbot, right? And at the beginning of
yeah,
WWDC,
right.
I think everyone from Paul Haddad to everyone was cursing, and then by midweek they're like, "Oh, I wonder what they'll come up with."
Right. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the interesting thing too, is that a lot of developers sort of, like did an end run around, like the UI styles, which were maybe sort of starting to look dated,
Yeah.
by putting together these big heavy custom things. And that's interesting because obviously some of them like sort of guessed right, and some of them sort of guessed wrong. And it's
Yeah.
it's I don't know if it's necessarily jarring, but it's sort of an interesting thing to look at and see like what was the evolution of all these different competing schools of thought. Like if you're going to take it extreme physical or like this extreme 2D
Mhm.
thing, and I kind of like hesitate to say flat. I don't know how that became like the buzzword. I don't know how where everybody sort
People
of decided.
misunderstand what skeuomorphic and flat mean, but they pulled out the overly rich textures, but it's more skeuomorphic
Right,
than any previous version of iOS because everything is a manipulable object. You have cards, which is an incredibly skeuomorphic metaphor, for God's sake.
right, right, and it's like all the textures aren't really gone. Like the
Yeah.
Notes app, I think they showed,
Reminders.
still, or somebody showed a screenshot of. They still have like a texture behind the
Yeah, it's on
text.
Apple.com, and the
So
letters
I
are
mean,
letterpressed. Like the actual letters are letterpressed into the
right.
app.
So I don't know if it's, like you're saying, everybody's sort of using it
Yeah.
wrong. I was kind of concerned there because I was like, oops, I hope I haven't ever used it wrong. I want to know what's the right way to
It's
use
just an
it.
analog for a
Like what's
real world thing, and you can use it for other
right.
stuff, but it became the whipping boy for green felt and studded leather. And
Yeah, right. And it's sort of like everybody talks about it, and I don't know if, like we've beaten that dead horse already, but I always like
it's a
wince,
Walking Dead horse
you
now.
know? Oh, it's just, yeah, that's right. It's like a zombie
One of the
now.
things that was cool though is,
Interesting.
and I'm going to refer to this, if you're listening to the show and you haven't listened to the last two episodes of Iterate, we got 8 of the best designers on the planet and sat them down and asked them all about iOS 7. And Chris Clarko was saying that it was incredibly expensive for designers to make even like 4 custom animations in iOS 6 and previously. But now, thanks to all the new tools, it's almost limitless the kind of direct animation that you can have in apps. And it's probably, the first ones that come out when iOS 7 launches may not be great, but going out 3 months, 6 months, a year with this caliber of people working with this, incredibly robust, easy to use frameworks, everyone's basically going to become a game developer for free.
Interesting. I mean, like, it needs to happen if you're going to have this animated OS. And I don't know, it just didn't really hit me initially, like just how animated everything is going to be, like how many animations there are. So obviously, yeah, if they want all that, everybody else, everything in the App Store that gets updated, everything that's still being actively worked on to be that way, then it needs to be easily accessible. And that seems to be like the big highlighter.
The thing that I love,
at least superficially.
The thing I loved is like Lorne Brichter was playing with pull to refresh. So he was playing with the inertial scrolling and the elastic band, and he came up with pull to refresh. And now you can play. I mean, the entire OS is playable, and I don't think Apple's shown it, but there are entire apps where you basically play to get the app functional. And that switch in mentality, the entire thing being gamified, I can't wait to see all the interactions that people come up with.
Yeah, it's fun to see the last of the interaction paradigms sort of come crashing down with like, menus and these sort of like contexts and all this, like stuff that we didn't like everybody kind of took for granted as coming from the desktop, but really just always came from the desktop. And I think I agree with you completely. Is that all of the like all the real cutting edge development work, all the real like breaking down of barriers is happening on the mobile side. So like is this like we're like, because basically we're getting serious about it now, and like as a computing platform, I mean, like serious in a like it's not just a phone with like some widgets on it, which is sort of like what the app started as. Like if you look at the weather app,
literally widgets,
which they sort of called out, right? It used to be a widget, and I think people forget that. Is that literally they were the dashboard, just like on a phone. So like obviously Apple didn't know what to do with this. Like there was always that debate about like, do we even want to have third-party development? Is it worth it? Like we have these widget things, everybody should be happy. Like why isn't everybody happy? We don't
make
understand.
web apps, let them eat cake.
Exactly. So now we're starting to get serious about both the iPhone and iPad as like a computing platform of their own. Maybe that like translates back over to notebooks. And I agree with you. It's fun to see all this stuff go away that like you didn't really need. And again, you have to discover things. I don't know if it's necessarily if there's a big trade-off, but it doesn't seem like there is. At least most of the time. So, I don't know.
And Craig Hockenberry had a great post where he likened this to the first version of OS 10, where it was a little too aqua, a little too lickable. Things were a little bit too big, too shiny, but over time Apple sort of calmed them down, and now you have a very sane, still beautiful looking, but very sane OS 10, and that this is like their first attempt at making this new operating system for iOS 7, and you can think that maybe iOS 8 or something will be a calmed down version of this as well, as everyone starts hitting their stride.
Right, especially because even like iOS 1 through 6, had this evolution and sort of like things became tamer, things became more polished, more refined. It's sort of stuff made sense after a while. So I think that's obviously the case. Like things are iterative. I don't know. What struck me as a little bit, like almost shocking though, is that like yesterday you saw the line about how we're like they're taking feedback type of stuff. I don't know how I feel about that, because like I think everybody has great ideas. I think there is a reality though that like even developers are sort of like consumers, and that they don't really know what they want until they get it. And part of the magic is like Apple sort of like comes down from the mountain with these tablets, right? Like, and literally now they're tablets. So, like, I don't know if it's just awareness now, or, like Apple's, like willingness to sort of take that feedback to heart is changing. But I found that really almost shocking. Like I was almost kind of blown away.
Well, I mean, it's Tim Cook's Apple now. It's
like,
a very different sort of an Apple.
Right. And that I guess that's hitting home for me, is that like all of a sudden that's the case now. Like I can't imagine Steve ever being like, okay, now you tell me what you
Yeah.
think, right? Like that's not gonna happen. So like that's interesting to me, and I don't know like what all we're gonna see change as like we sort of make this the difference between the initial launch and the final iOS 7 Gold Master, whenever that
But
happens.
didn't it seem like it seemed to me that, and it's no secret, or at least it's a widely known rumor that after Scott Forstall left and Johnny Ive took over, there was a radical change in direction for iOS, and the team is all. I mean, Apple, for all their money, does not have a very large team. They have very small teams, very purpose-built teams, and they were running
Right.
flat out to make WWDC. And what we got there was probably the earliest ever type of beta, maybe even borderline alpha release for the first
Right.
time, and that's not what we're used to seeing from Apple either. I mean, they couldn't even get the iPad version done until beta 2. And
I totally
yeah,
agree with you. I think that's what's different here, is that this is so early. It's like even we're not even. I mean, people are talking like, are the icons
yeah.
even final, right? So I mean, would that have happened before? I mean, there's always this like second guessing type of thing that like they want to avoid. That I mean, I kind of want to avoid too, because like it's sort of it's an easy thing to to armchair, but the reality is, yeah, like we're soliciting
Hmm.
feedback. Well, that's kind of scary, but I mean, maybe it's for the better. This needs to be like a back and forth process,
Well, my understanding is that before
between.
Forstall left, we were going to get a lot of the things like the new version of background tasks, where I think was supposed to be in iOS 6, but got bumped, and that's why the podcast app ended up the
Hmm,
way it was. And I think the multitasking
huh,
was in the pipeline because it's a development cycle where if something's not finished, it just goes into the next version of iOS. It's like it's a stream, not a series of
right,
stops. But this new
right.
approach to it was completely new. So if not for the new management, we would have got the next version of iOS 6 instead of this version of iOS 7.
Interesting. Well, in this case, I'm glad they have I'm glad they went with this next version of iOS 7, because like everybody was sort of demanding a visual
Mm-hmm.
refresh, and I think that's sort of like the easy. It's just because like it's something to look at that's different, and it's easy to point to and say like, look at things that are different now. um like my thing was that I was kind of like, well, I hope everybody is happy that they were wishing for this, because like be careful for what you wish
Well,
for, because now you
well, I mean,
have
the
it,
paint is hiding
you
the
know
new like. So basically, they painted the car and changed the engine at the same time, and the paint job is
right.
such that no one is paying attention to the engine.
Exactly, I completely agree. And like the last major revisions have always been, like the engine changed, like we just changed,
Yeah,
like we gave the car a coat of
yeah.
wax or something, so I think it's just, yeah, it's like a superficial thing to really analyze. I really hope that, yeah, this new multitasking interface with like the new multitasking interface and the changes
Hmm.
to backgrounding are
Yeah.
awesome, because for me my major use case is like sort of using my messaging, which is instant
Hmm.
messaging, and that currently sort of works in this way where it gets cut down. You get push notifications that come in. When you launch the app, it doesn't know about the
Yeah.
push notifications, and then it sort of reconnects and hydrates itself. And when I'm using Android, that's something I
Yeah.
don't miss, because it's running all the time. It's connected. I go back, everything is there. I don't have to wait for it to reconnect, pull everything down. Maybe the network works, maybe it doesn't.
It always takes much
Um,
longer to get the content in the actual app than it did to get the content in the notification. So you pull it down and read half the message notification while you're
exactly.
waiting. So annoying.
Yeah, and I think stuff like that, that's starting to become, like an actual thorn in the side, like an actual, major friction point. And at least for me, like everything else aside, like differences in the
Hmm.
platform, differences in the UI, differences in performance, like that's a major functional thing, at least for me, that like sort of brings me back to Android, or at least has been for the last couple of
But I
months,
like that it
just
wasn't
because.
like it didn't just turn on backgrounding. They're doing a lot of server side smarts. Like if you're checking IM constantly,
Right,
they'll escalate the privilege for IM in the background, and they'll also if they're doing the same kind of coalescing. Like if you wake the screen, they'll check for background processes. If the radio spools up, like if GPS spools up, anything else that's waiting to tag along gets GPS. And now when the push notification arrives, that can trigger. So you can have basically
right.
timers, or you can have notifications that spool up the background tasks.
I think it's absolutely the right way to do
Yeah.
things. And I mean, you can even see on Android they kind of always like touted this persistent multitasking as like an advantage, And I think it was maybe an advantage in like sort of the political
Hmm.
sense that like you had something different. Like here, let's talk about it. I don't know if it was an advantage in terms of their implementation. And like there's always that rumor about like what's coming next. Is it gonna get cut back down to look something more like
Yeah.
iOS? To like make these lower end phones, which is really where that platform is selling, more
Yeah.
accessible and more like
So it
more
hurts less.
suitable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like make the pain
Yeah.
go away. So I think that this is a big deal, and everybody needs to talk about that more instead of like the icons look weird, or like the like the game's icon doesn't fit within the grid. Like I think that's really superficial like, and that's kind of why Apple I think hesitates, or maybe it hesitated in the
Mhm.
past to sort of do this thing where we just reskin everything for the sake of reskinning it, which I don't want to say that's what happened here, but like it's part of
Yeah.
it, and it's part of the attempt to sort of stem this. Maybe they have this perception that they're not innovating quickly enough, or like they're not fresh and original,
Phil
which
Schiller's
obviously isn't
ass,
true, but
Brian.
exactly. I mean, you see clearly they're worried about it, which is, like is that a
Yep.
reality? Is that just like a talking points memo from the other side? And I think it probably is, because obviously Apple is
Yeah.
innovating, but they're kind of taking it to heart. Maybe they're more sensitive about it
Well, I like
now.
that they're
So
afraid
there's
because no
this
one ever sees what
urge.
obsoletes them coming, and no one ever sees themselves turn into their father. But it kind of always happens. So I
That's
like it
true.
when they're afraid.
You wake up one day and you're just like 40, like
I'll give you
50,
something to cry about. Wait a
um,
minute, I said that.
60. Yeah, you're just like yelling at kids to get off your lawn. You just realize all of a sudden that, yeah, now I'm my dad.
So what I'm really interested in is we've seen a lot of iOS 7, but they always seem to hold something back, even if it's as trivial as panoramas last year for when the new hardware comes out. And this year, everyone's assuming it's an iPhone 5S. The parts leaks look like an iPhone 5S, which just means, the same casing
Yeah,
as last year with an internal bump and some, fresh software.
right.
Usually they need something like Siri was for the iPhone 4S and video was for the iPhone 3GS, I believe. And this year, I mean, I'm wondering what they could do. We spoke previously. Do you think that like last year they in the iPhone 5 they got the same quality camera into a much thinner body. So this year could they
Yep.
get a much better camera into the same thin body?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the I mean, I think I talked last time about how it seemed like they were going to move to like
Yeah.
f2.2 or f2.0. Currently they're at f2.4. I mean, beyond that, things aren't really going to change dramatically. I kind of had my fingers crossed that maybe they'd have OIS. I don't know if they are. I don't know if they can.
Do they need it at this point
The
because
thing,
HTC has it and Nokia has it?
it seems like it's starting to be a thing that everybody has. Yeah, I mean, I would hope so. It's not that hard, to be honest. Um, it's. I don't think anybody other. I think Nokia's implementation is really the one to beat. I mean, HTC did a good job. Is it perfect?
Yeah.
No. There's a lot of innovation there. What I saw in those leaked case pictures that's interesting is that they had the dual color
Yeah.
flash. Like you, and that's a thing that is going to be a big deal coming up. And I'm kind of groaning about it internally because I think if you have to use flash, you've already
Yeah.
failed. And the problem before, I guess, was again the color cast. It was very
Hmm.
blue. So the way this works is that you have the two LEDs. You can obviously step between the two in brightness, and then like change
Hmm.
your color temperature anywhere between the two extremes. So like between tungsten and this like blue
Yeah.
thing, that sort of like is the normal the more normal spectrum of like the white LED. So I think that's very interesting, and it's obviously there. Again, like if you're using a flash, I would say it's arguably already lost. Like I hate direct flash.
Yeah.
I'm always gonna hate direct flash, and it's always gonna make you look like a zombie. You're just gonna be like a correctly, the color temperature is gonna be
Yeah.
correct this time. So that's a big deal, and it seems to be there. I think, yeah, it shouldn't surprise anybody if we get a chassis, the same chassis
Hmm.
basically, with a different board
Do you think they need
inside.
to go to 13
And
megapixels like Samsung or go down to like 4 like
no, oh
HTC?
God, I don't. I think Apple. I think if Apple. I said this to somebody, and I don't know if it really clicked, but if Apple doesn't go to 13, that's a validation of HTC strategy to go to
Hmm.
4. And I say this because really the thing you don't want to do is go to 1.1. And I just strongly believe that basically once you've done that, you're really sacrificing all of the nighttime
Yeah.
performance. You're really basically making an impossible problem from MTF. Um, the modulation transfer function, you're just never going to be able to resolve
Yeah.
detail that small. And basically, it becomes entirely a thing of specsmanship. Like the 1.1 micron step is essentially just
You want to
specsmanship.
put a big number on your
And
box.
yeah, the number needs to go up each year because otherwise, how like they're not going to buy our
Yeah.
thing. Like we don't understand why they're not buying. So I think if they don't, people might like bemoan it. But obviously, Apple will do the storytelling the right
Yeah.
way and sort of like explain to everybody like you don't want to do this because like it doesn't make sense. And like I think it's sort of interesting that this already is sort of played out. Like HTC did some of the heavy lifting for it. They didn't really get combative in
Hmm.
the sense that we're going to go and like talk about all the demerits of 1.1 and et cetera, et cetera. And obviously for outdoors, like that camera works
Yeah.
okay. It works fine. But again, like if you zoom in 1 to 1, are you ever getting like that pixel per pixel detail? And the answer is no. So, is camera going to get dramatically better? Probably not. Like, I mean, I always hesitate to say like never, but I mean, there are laws of physics here.
The
I
Z
think,
index, right? It's
I
not
think that,
not working for them.
yeah, I think that it does need to get better, and it can get better. And like, is that going to be a big selling point? Yeah. Obviously, there's going to be something else. I don't know what it's
I
going to
don't think they'd
be.
put
It
a
has to
big
be something
honking
else.
face hugger on it like an EOS or what was that? Or the Samsung Zoom. I
Right.
don't think Apple would go in that direction.
No, I don't think they can either. They really, it seems to me like they really want this thinness story. They
Hmm.
really want you know, they want to solve the hard problem, right? And like the easy solution is to make the thing just
Yeah,
huge.
like a
Um,
920
and
huge.
you see there's other OEMs willingness to do this. Like Samsung kind of wants to find
Yeah.
out, like, are people willing to buy a camera that's also a phone, which is really what the
Yeah.
S4 Zoom is. But it does, like, if you look at the S4 Zoom, it doesn't really do either well. It's worse. It's worse on paper than Galaxy
Hmm.
Camera, which already wasn't that strong of a performer on the imaging side, and it's not even really an S4 from the phone point of view. So it's like everything kind of takes a hit to become this
I do
thing.
like that they're the wacky uncle ready, willing to try anything though, because they'll stumble, they'll fall, but once in a while they'll
Yeah,
stumble over a good idea and someone else will take it and productize it.
that's true. That's true. I think that's absolutely. I mean, and that's absolutely their business
Yeah.
model. Like that's no mystery. I mean, obviously Apple's a little bit more reserved, and they sort of have this like balanced story that plays its way out each year. Um, I don't really know what the like compelling thing is going to
Do
be.
they
If
need
I don't
stereo
like,
speakers like HTC put on the One? Is that going to be table stakes soon?
I think that's a pretty compelling thing on
Hmm.
the One. Like, have you
Yep.
used it? Yeah, I think it's for me. I can't go back. Like when I go to the S4, that little speaker on the back, just even on
Yeah.
calls, like in the car on maps and navigation, I really miss it. Like I miss not having stereo. Does Apple need to do it? I don't know. Like, would they be viewed as
A
copying
licensing agreement with Ice
or
Cube.
like
So if they
borrowing?
have Dre, then Apple can have Ice Cube.
Ice Cube. That's pretty good. That would be
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, this should be like Jay Z. It needs to be like, although I
No,
guess doesn't somebody else already have Jay
everyone needs
Z?
an NWA survivor. So Nokia can have MC Ren, and then that's all it goes.
I like that idea. Well, they can steal
Yeah,
that. Yeah, I don't know if you're okay with that, but they should steal
absolutely.
that.
That leaves Easy E for BlackBerry, and they can figure that out later.
They already have who does BlackBerry have? I
Oh, Alicia
forget.
Keys.
They have somebody. Alicia
Yeah,
Keys. That's right.
but
So
I'd like better speakers. I mean, the iPad
yeah, I
Mini
mean, I
got
think
stereo.
what I just realized is that they have the iOS 7 story to
Hmm.
tell. Like, obviously that launch will be synced up with the iPhone. Like, I think you even tweeted
Yeah,
that. That means there's going to be a new iPhone in the
yeah.
fall. You know, so like, do they have to have something else? from the hardware side beyond just like the like sort of iterative improvements, which are always
But
phenomenal and
everything is
huge.
boring now. I mean, the iPhone 5 was boring, even though they rebuilt it from the atom was boring. The Galaxy S4, it's really a Galaxy S3s. I mean, people from the media, and I'm using the term media lightly because I don't think that people who make those comments are actually part of the media. But from the media to the
It
to
is,
the
yeah.
mainstream, there was this sense of ennui with the last generation of smartphones, which is
Right.
nuts.
No, yeah, I totally. I just think that's people like talking. Um,
You can say out their
I
ass.
think
That's fine.
it's obviously gonna have
Yeah.
AC. It's obviously gonna have like an A6s or an
Hmm.
A7. Like who knows? Um, I don't know if it's soon enough for the TSMC change. I mean, obviously we'll see improvements to Swift. Maybe we'll see rogue graphics. I mean, these are just
Yeah.
speculative. Um, the better camera on the back, bigger battery just because they shifted
Yeah.
things around. Um, yeah, BCM 4339. The AC combo chip,
Now I
all that
wonder.
stuff. Speaking of the combo, everybody was talking about like how AirPlay is
Yeah.
reserved. I think they publicly put that out there. Like AirPlay works on these set of devices. Why doesn't it work on these other ones? And that's because it's sort of like a Bluetooth discovery but Wi-Fi file transfer feature that only got introduced with that,
Yeah.
the generation of combos that you see in those products. So it's not like they drew an arbitrary line in the sand and just said we're going to differentiate things. It's literally just a hardware feature that isn't there. I don't know. That's tangential. I don't want to change
No,
the
no,
topic,
absolutely.
but
I mean,
I
no, I think that's
just while we're
absolutely
on
true.
the subject of combos, that's why you see that. And like everybody has their own like kind of hokey version of this, where they do the discovery on Bluetooth, but then it's sort of like out of band
Hmm.
basically, and then they do the transfer over Wi-Fi, like
And
Wi-Fi
Apple's even doing
direct.
that with iOS in the car now. So I mean, that's going to be a big thing for them going forward, probably.
Yeah, and like everybody was cheering about that. I don't know if I want. Um, I don't know how I feel about in-vehicle integration in that sort of like the very long refresh cycle
And
sense, because at least for me, like I think it's sort of like it's a very nice thing that like maybe a small percentage of the population gets to enjoy that. Like my car is on a 6-month cadence, or like I'm changing my
although
car
Apple's
every like
projecting
couple.
interface, they're not embedding it, which might be different. I don't know how that's actually going to work out.
Right. I hope it's like an
It
AirPlay
is.
thing. I
Yeah.
really hope
No,
that's the
no, it
case
is.
because oh, that would
Yeah.
be awesome because that's the right way to
Yeah.
do it. This thing where like I need to go and like, buy a
No,
new
no. Yeah.
dashboard
No,
or
it's
like even the Audi thing where you buy a new module.
my understanding is that it's a
It's
projected
difficult for me to
interface.
swallow.
So it should be, I mean, it should be exactly what you're thinking.
That would be awesome. That's exactly what
Yeah.
I want then.
The thing you mentioned also with Rogue graphics, because they've got everything now as a basically a 3D rendered engine operating system. We talked last time about 1080p displays and how that's a standard, and how Apple going to at 3x or at 4x doesn't make a lot of sense. But I wonder if because they're doing
Right.
an objectified interface, and they talked a lot about their new type engine. I don't know how much is public, but their new type engine is pretty awesome. Um,
That's a big deal too.
yeah, that
Yeah.
makes me wonder if eventually they'll be able to break free of the 1x, 2x paradigm, and if they need to shift, because again, like 3x, 4x, insane. If they need to shift something like 1080p, I wonder if that will make it easier for them.
You mean I think so I mean and people were speculating too about like the back
Hmm.
gesture, right? And what does the back gesture mean in terms of, like future products or what the
Rounded
strategy
edges,
is to
Brian.
sort of
It's
like
obviously going to be rounded edges.
yeah, right? I mean like to decouple everything from like the iPhone, which is kind of the flagship, and then the
Yeah,
iPad, and then the mini now, which is kind of like an also ran, in terms of form factor. So I think yeah, these are things that obviously you said it. It's the way to make it more agnostic and more of like a real platform as opposed to like a phone OS that also happens to run on tablets and like this
yeah.
mini
Have you
thing.
seen the
You
iOS
know,
7 on the Mini or the iPad?
no, I haven't.
It's
I haven't.
there's an argument to be made that it looks even more at home on the tablets than it does on the phone. Yeah,
Really
yeah,
interesting. I mean, that's good to hear because like obviously like when they were making making the initial versions of iOS, there
yeah.
was no iPad, right? So it was always gonna be like we adapted it to fit. And if it's more at home, then that's a big saving grace because I know for me, like I can't ever really get over like the icon spacing, like the just like kind of lack of
Yeah.
space like that they don't use. like people I think were talking on Twitter, like, or leaking, like things that, like were full screen now or
Hmm.
took advantage of everything. And I think that that's a very big deal. And it sounds almost like, it sounds like childish or stupid, but to be like, oh, it uses up the whole
Yeah.
screen now. But yeah, it is a
Yeah.
big deal. And yeah, I think that, like if they have the type engine that's sort of modular and it moves and it's more dynamic, that's a big deal for getting into these platforms that, like have different dot pitch,
Yeah.
have different scaling, like you're saying. I don't think the iPhone necessarily needs to get any smaller. It doesn't need to get higher res. Um, if you're going to move to a bigger phone though, and you want to keep
Hmm.
Retina there, and have like you're saying a 1080p phone that's maybe like closer to 5 inches, which is sort of where everybody's sort of sitting, then yes, you do need these things, and like maybe that's what's coming. We haven't seen it leak yet. I think it's interesting because on the software side, all of this was a surprise. All of the
Yeah.
software didn't leak. It's easy to keep the software under control because that's all in like the couple
Yeah.
buildings there,
In the vault.
in Cupertino. Right. And like it's easy to point a finger and say like that dude was working on it. It's your fault. So it's harder to keep the hardware under wraps. And there's this obviously this big dichotomy between the two, and like everything on the hardware side sort of leaks. If there was going to be a bigger one, why haven't we seen
Hmm.
it, right? And I kind of that's at
Well,
least
the
like what
first
I
stuff never
subscribe
leaked. Like
to.
the original iPad didn't leak. The original iPhone didn't leak. The original iPad Mini leaked a little bit because
Sure.
it was a continuation. But they seem better at keeping. Maybe because they announced it much earlier. The first version seems to always be more of a contained issue than the later updates.
That's true. That's true. I would say that like anything at volume, at scale, it's just gonna
Yeah.
leak. Like there's no way around it. And I don't know if it's I think there's almost sort of a market factor that plays in here. Like if I'm gonna leak a part, what do I want to leak? I want to leak the thing that people are gonna talk
Yeah.
most about. As opposed to like things just happen to happen. I think obviously there's an ecosystem there as well. Like things are targeted and sort
Yeah.
of orchestrated and obviously bought and paid for. No one really talks about that part of the thing. So I would be very surprised if there was a larger phone if we didn't get to at least see the chassis, prior to its
Yeah.
launch. But I think for Apple that would be a big deal. And like the thing for me is that a lot of that is to address the readability issue. And at least when I go into the Apple store and I see the primary consumers aren't like people my
Yeah.
age or younger. It's mainstream. So you have like all sorts of ages and all sorts of eyeballs trying to read these screens. And what's good for the designer, or their designers that have good eyes, and like these other designers that are still like relatively young people, and what's good for these like these other people that are really the volume are two different things. And having that type engine that sort of works is a big
Yeah.
deal. And like when I first saw the lock screen pop up, I said that's unreadable. Like
Yeah.
that's going to be just completely unreadable. And like you see light on light,
Yeah. The contrast
that's
is
just a
bad and the
design no
fonts are
no.
really thin.
Yeah, exactly. And like I think the argument back is like, well, you know you should change your wallpaper, or like
So yeah,
do
it's a
these other
bad argument.
things. Right. And so I think I'm being very cautious here, but like it's difficult to do these things right. And obviously having this option to like change the text
Mhm.
around is a mitigation that they haven't really sold yet. And it's there, and now I'm sort of more at ease about like what is this going to look like to the vast majority of consumers that are going to look at this out of the box and say, wow, like I can't read this all of a sudden, or they get the update. And I don't know. I can't help but think about like when I was doing a high school newspaper and we won design awards. And my advisor had a really keen eye for design, and he would scream things like, "That's unreadable. That's light on light."
Yeah. My art
You
teacher did the
know,
same thing.
um,
Hold it 5 feet away. Can you still read it?
exactly. Yeah, and I'm wondering like, is there anybody there that's sort of like this frumpy old person that's sort of like seen everything ever from like print? Because like everybody talks about like print is dead. Well, like we talk about things like kerning and
Yeah.
legibility, and like basically it's just print. Like that's what it
Yeah.
is. The layout is literally just laying out a newspaper, or laying out like a news magazine or something like this, but it's just on a phone. It's a little bit more animated and things are a little bit more fluid, but that's really what it comes down to. And I'm wondering, do they have somebody there that's like, yelling back at all these things? Um, and that's what I worry the most about,
Well, it was apparently the
but
print and web
it's better
department
now.
that did this new design, so we'll have to see how far that goes.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that that's the case, because that's really where you want to absorb as much as
Yeah.
possible, like the lessons of the last century of print media, or more. Since the invention of the printing press, people have been asking these questions about readability and how do things work, and then like what's a headline font, what's a subhead font, what's a body font,
Yeah. At
and
what point does Helvetica itself break down for a digital medium?
exactly. Like I would love for Apple to make their own font.
They apparently have,
And
and
you saw people
yeah,
talking about that, right? I mean, like, I want to see the
yeah.
font. Like, I don't believe that we should be hobbled by, and I don't, like, I love
Everyone
Helvetica.
loves Helvetica.
Obviously, it's everybody loves Helvetica. But I don't like. Do we like what is the sacred cow in this context that like we need to get over? And I think that's probably one of them. You know, and I know that's going to be like a big gnashing of teeth, and like everybody's going to find some issue with it the first time. But I would love to see a font that's totally optimized only for mobile, totally optimized to
Absolutely.
fit within the
For a
constraints
new digital
of,
world.
like, yeah, of this new context. Like things are breathable and not like printed on a piece of paper. Um, and I don't, like maybe serifs come back. Like maybe
Mhm.
these other things come back. Maybe there's even more hinting. Like I don't know. Like I'm not a font designer. I just like look at things and like armchair them. So I don't know what's coming, but that's the thing for me that I almost wish that they had thrown out the window. But you can't throw everything out the window on the first
Absolutely.
try. So
And hopefully
I
it's
don't know.
modular enough. Brian, I could literally talk to you all day. It is fascinating to me. Would you be willing to come back and we can continue talking about this on another time?
Yeah, and I want to talk about the time capsule real
Oh,
quickly
okay.
too. You teased me about that a little bit
Yeah, so the
earlier.
time caps.
Yeah,
Well,
we should talk more later as
one
well.
question I have quickly for you is a lot of people said that AC is an interim step to AD, and they wondered why Apple wouldn't just wait and go straight to AD. But I think that it's probably too long a gap if they do that.
So I mean, obviously it's sort of a draft, and the draft became this like this interim standard that everybody decided they wanted to go to. I think it's just because like Broadcom has silicon, it's proven, it's out there. Uh, Again, like you see these changes that sort of play out, where the silicon vendor makes like a choice on their roadmap, and then everybody
Yeah.
kind of like just implements it. And this is one of those. This is one of those cases, especially with, um, you know, the time capsule, which is a 4360, and the
Mhm.
MacBook Air, which is also 4360. So, I mean, you have the silicon. Why not do it? I mean, like, why would you wait? And that's really the case here. And it does have considerable improvements over the previous generation. Like, if you're going to always be implementing the old thing, you're going to fall
Yeah.
behind. And I think Apple was always kind of first to Wi-Fi improvements, which sounds a little bit strange, like because they don't really tout that as a huge deal, but it's the case. Like they were the first to three
Hmm.
stream, you know, and now they're the first on
Charge
notebook to
me a
have
dollar for
AC, I
N back in
believe.
the day.
Yeah, right. And so I mean, but it was
Yep.
there. So these are big improvements, and like I've had AC for a while, but it only like in
Hmm.
phones, right? Which is hilarious to me because everybody's like, oh, the desktop is
Yeah.
awesome.
Phil
Like you
Nicholson
see all
said he
these
couldn't
cool
see a
things
big
there.
difference.
Yeah, but I mean, it's
Yeah.
there, and the improvements that you get really only come with like
Hmm.
beamforming, performance at the edge. Everybody's like, "Do I need 433 megabits on a phone?" I think what people don't realize is that the performance and power problem are the
Hmm.
same. Like, if I can deliver more bits to you quickly, and that looks like a higher bit rate, I'm gonna have more time that I'm spent
Hmm.
idle. Like you get the same, you get the same exact. If you're doing the same workload on a faster bit rate, you're gonna spend more time
Yeah.
idle, and that's where you get the power gains. Just because the radio is asleep more often, like it's not doing anything anymore. So, like I think people need to realize that side of the thing too, rather than like asking, do I need 1.3 gigabits? in my notebook, across
Well, I do
there.
testing that's nowhere near as scientific as you, but I ran like a bunch of file transfers from the old MacBook Air to the old time capsule, and I did the new MacBook Air to the new time capsule, and then I did both ways, and it was significantly faster, even with the crappy AC drivers or whatever is plaguing the MacBook Air. It was still, 30 seconds to 45 seconds faster, which adds up when I move a lot of video files around.
Yeah, TCP receive window issue that they have, which Anon
Yeah.
sort of discovered and talked about. But I agree with you. There's no reason it shouldn't be a huge gain. And like beamforming, that is implemented on there, and it's gonna push you out further. Like I've already noticed, at least on there are other routers that had beamforming with the same chipset, and it's difficult to codify the difference, but it is noticeable. It is there. And I mean, stuff like that is a big gain. Like moving to wider
Yeah.
channels is awesome. I don't know why you wouldn't do it. So like, if the silicon is there again, like why
Absolutely.
not? And it's gonna come on the phone too in the 4339. So or I believe that's the most recently announced one with the power amp inside. So I mean, again, it's the same. It's the same axis. It's just like people don't really see it that way. Like same with LTE. It's like people ask this question: do I need 150 megabits in my phone? And like they're asking it rhetorically. The answer is no. But it's like you're never going to see that.
Yes.
First of all, second of all, the goal there isn't to just give one person 150 megabits. Like it's shared aggregate. And third of all, any speed improvements that you get are really battery life improvements because the phone is going to be spending less time connected to do the same workload. And that's the message that I want to leave. Like when people ask that question as being the primary driver.
If I
But
drive home in a Ferrari, I can spend more time in bed.
exactly. Oh, they should sell that. That should be their tagline.
Brian, where can people find out more about you and where can they see your work?
So I write for Anandtech, anandtech.com, ANANDTCH. I'm Nerd Talker on Twitter. Definitely follow me. I love
Yeah.
Twitter.
You're quite excellent at it.
Thanks. I'm
You have a lot of
addicted.
fun there.
It's really
Yeah,
addicting.
absolutely.
Oh, it is a lot of fun. Yeah, heck yes. And so, anyways, yeah, go read the site and follow along. Hopefully, I'll do a time capsule review.
Awesome.
Just a matter of finding time. So,
All right. Well,
yeah.
thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find me on iMore.com. You can find all of our shows at mobilenations.com. Chat room, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Brian.